Alright, welcome back everybody to Empyrion Galactic Survival Creative Mode. I'm KnowItAllDM. How y'all doing today? I'm doing absolutely great today. And like I said, today I'm hanging out Creative Mode. So what I'm going to do, I've been asked by several people to give some, tutorial building tips and all on different types of building things. The most common that I've been asked, both in comments and not, is to give help with hover vessels and small vessels. Now, building is relatively easy, and if you've seen, a lot of my videos, you'll notice that I, build a lot. And so I'm going to just go with a little quick tutorial here for both hover vessels and small vessels, which are extremely similar, but yet they have some major differences. So with hover vessels, the basics that you need, the absolute minimum you need, is a hover vessel starter, maybe some steel blocks, fuel tank, generator, an RCS, cockpit blocks, at least 4 thrusters, and a few hover engines. So I'm going to just go ahead and take all that and throw them down on my hotbar. And now, since I'm in creative mode, I could use the God mode and fly, but since I want to do this for you guys who also want to build in survival mode, I'm just going to do it as if I were in survival mode without using that, but with using the drone to help me build. So normally when I'm creating a hover vessel or a small vessel, the first thing I do is just throw down the starter. I mean, you got to start with the starter somewhere. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a multi-tool, you're awesome. You'll be a lot better at building. So I'm going to go as if you do have one, because you're going to want to take some blocks away. So to start with, what I almost always do is I'll use the disassemble to take away all these excess blocks. I almost never need all those blocks there, because I'm going to replace them with the generator and fuel tank. So normally for an initial hover vessel, I'll start off putting the RCS behind the starter block or behind the core, and then just put the fuel tank and generator on either side. If you're making a bigger hover vessel, you're going to want to, move those around, put them different places, think about where you're going to want to put those, otherwise. But if you're just starting out and want to build a quick but simple hover vessel, that's what you're going to want to build. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is decide which cockpit you want to use, whether you want this to be an exterior cockpit or one that's an open cockpit, and you're going to want to decide whether you want to go into it or if you want to be able to access the cockpit from outside. Now, I'm going to do a basic one where you can access the cockpit from outside, and I'm going to choose one of these basic cockpits. One of my favorites to use is the Cockpit 5 or the Legacy Cockpit 5, which is what I used for my mini-pod small vessel. Now, the reason I like using this one is it has the lowest profile and the least amount of blocks in total that is used. That makes it where your small vessel's center of mass is more easily maneuverable, or your hover vessels. Now, for most hover vessels, you're going to want a minimum of 4 hover engines and 4 thrusters. So you're going to want to decide where you want to put those. Now, for this, I'm going to go ahead and say that these blocks under here, I'm just going to put blocks down there. But I'm not just going to, throw squares down there, because squares are boring. I'm going to go ahead and choose some of these blocks to make angles. Now, the ones that I want to start with, I want to start with this one here. Now, instead of doing it, I could go ahead and just start building, but it's a lot easier if you want to use a symmetrical one, which you almost always do. You want to click YZ symmetry, and then you can click and drag where on the vessel you want the symmetry. In this case, I want it in the middle of the center block instead of the middle of the 2 blocks on either side. So I'm going to go ahead and place it there, hit escape, and now when I place a block on one side, it mirrors it on the other side. In order to access that menu, it's normally hotkeyed to N, so you just pull up this menu, and we'll get into these selections later. I use that a lot in creating some of my larger builds, the POIs and the like, mostly with bases or capital vessels, and I'll show you how to use those in another video sometime. But in any case, so what you want to do, you want to get familiar with all the blocks that you have at your disposal so you can decide what shapes you want to build things in. So, for instance, if you want to build an angle that's a gently sloping angle, you just want to start with this one, then that one, then that one, then that one. Like so. This one, this one, and then this one. Now I've got a gently slope that slopes underneath my hover vessel. Now out here, I'm going to want to continue this trend, but I don't want to just throw this here, throw that there, because doing that makes it, you know, well, if I did this and then this, like so, then I would have to put this up here and this like that and make a larger thing. Now, that's perfectly acceptable, and if you want to continue your front like so and use a whole lot more blocks, you could make a vessel that goes, you know, forward like that. In fact, I think I might keep this part that I just did here. But for the very front, I'm going to make a sharper angle like so, because otherwise you could just, you know, it would come a little too far out and the center of mass would be a little far forward. Now, this in the front, what you're going to want to do, you want to determine where to put your hover engines to get your center of mass where you want it. In this case, I want to put my hover engine probably right here. You want to put it as far forward as you can without making it too far forward. So I'm going to put it right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in that block and this block and then put this here. Now I've got to put a forward facing thruster, so I'm going to put that right here. Now you don't have to have the thruster exposed. I could go ahead and just fill this in like that, and the thruster would work perfectly fine for now. Eventually, I think they might make it so that those interior thrusters and all don't really do anything, which would make a lot of sense. So what I like to do, I like going ahead and making it so that my vessels make a little bit of sense. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use small window shutters. I'm going to use the vertical transparent, or the slope transparent. Now, if you don't have access to Sathium, instead of using shutter blocks, you can use these to create the exact same appearance with a lot less protection. But now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and put this block in here, and if you throw it back into your inventory and then back down there, it just makes a flat thing. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use small ramps to just cover that up, and a wall just to make it, you know, so that the front doesn't have anything exposed, and yet you got the forward facing thruster. Now, for the back part of this, all I have left is 3 thrusters, one for the left, one for the right, and one for the back. So I'm going to go ahead, I want to put the left and right here, but the back I'm not going to put in until I put a few more blocks, because I'm going to want the back to be a little further back, largely for purposes of stability. Now I'm going to go ahead, cover those up, and then I want to move this back at least 2 blocks, like so, and that'll give you enough room to put whatever you need inside here. If you wanted to move your generators and fuel tanks to back here or whatever, you could, but I'm going to go ahead and just fill in these. Now with this, I want to go ahead and if you look at the center of mass, in order to get the center of mass, go into the vessel, press in, and then come hit debug, show center of mass, and you'll see that with my center of mass, the yellow ball is where your center of mass is, and the blue ball is the center of volume. So you'll notice I have more mass on the left than the right. That is because my generator actually has more mass than my fuel tank. If you fill the fuel tank up and then get in there, I don't know if fuel actually weighs anything at this point. Eventually, they plan on making it so that it does. Now, if I get in here and out, does that change it? No, I didn't think so. But in order to change that, all you have to do is put extra blocks on one side or the other. Which, you know, with the mirror, you'll have to take it off and change that. But I'm going to go ahead and put my rear-facing thruster down here. And it doesn't matter at all where you put the thruster. If you put the thrusters, say, like one up here and then one in the back, one facing left, one facing right, unlike in real life where if you had them both going it would start spinning, it doesn't do that in this game because the game isn't exactly realistic yet in that matter. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and put these down, and I'm going to want to put hover engines down. So actually what I'm going to want to do instead of that, I'm going to want to angle this outward and then like so build a little exterior hover thing. If you're using only 3 hover, let me go ahead and actually let me use this. Give me that back. If you're only using 3 hover engines, you want to use a triangle. Otherwise, your thing will be lopsided. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Let me go ahead and put these 2 down there. And you always want your thrusters to be, or your hover engines to be at the same height as each other. You'll notice in almost all of my builds, in fact, in all of my hover vessel builds, that the hover engines are always at the same height. So now I'm going to go ahead and just fill in the rest of these blocks here and there, and then I'm going to put this right there, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I did in the front back here, and I'm going to cover this up with solid blocks because I'm going to put solid blocks along here. Now for the sides, I want angled blocks like so, and you'll notice that I'm using as little interior space for this just so that we can have some interior room to walk on the back of this. Now I might want to cover up my hover engines, I might not, it all depends. I might want to put this completely covered so I can walk into the back or not. It doesn't really matter. Let me go ahead and fill that in. And now we've got room to walk back here. We can put whatever we want. In fact, I can go ahead and fill those 2 in, and we can still walk, you know, perfectly fine. Jump into here and then walk out. It's perfectly fine. So now that we've got the basics in here, we can turn it on and hover up. You'll notice hover vessels tend to stick to the ground if they don't have what do you call them? The landing pads. So we want to go ahead and get landing pads. It doesn't really... Where are the landing pads? I know they're here somewhere. There they are. It doesn't really matter where you put the landing pads. Usually I like putting them in either a triangle or, you know, putting 4 of them down. But this way the vessel won't stick. It'll just, you know, dock when you land. Now you'll notice that my hover vessel angles slightly forward because I've got 2 engines in the back and 1 in the front. So what I'm going to want to do, I'm going to want to, let me raise you up a bit more. Now sometimes hover vessels keep their height when you raise them and other times they don't. It's really kind of random. So if I go ahead and take that out and put that on, you'll notice when I get into it that it re-angled, and it actually angled to be perfectly flat. Because now I've got 2 in front and 2 in back. One on left, one on right, so left and right, it is balanced. If you were to, say, for some reason have extra hover engines and put them on the sides, well, I was going to say one on like both on one side or whatever, but those 2 hover engines are actually doing absolutely no good right now, because they are at a higher level than the lower engines. If you wanted, you could put, let me just do this, get out, and I'm going to show a little trick that I learned. Okay, get rid of you. Now, one thing that you can do, a lot of times you'll notice that hover vessels, when they're moving, let me get rid of center of mass and building symmetry because I don't need that. You'll notice when they go into the water, sometimes if they go in at the wrong angle or are too low, they'll just hit the water and they'll go under, just like that. And then even if you raise the hover height, they don't come out. They're just stuck there. So what I did on one of my more recent builds is I used a little technique that I came up with. Hold on. Let me put that symmetry back. Like so. Now, if you remove it and replace the symmetry, quite often it gets all skewed. So I like to replace it manually like that. Now, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to put additional hover engines at higher heights, like this, and then I'm going to put one there, and you'll notice that is just 2 above here. So I'm going to go ahead and put, let's put 1 here, and then we can go ahead and just put 1 on top of that, because even if there's something underneath it, as long as it's above the water, that's all that matters. Now when you get in here, it'll hover high, and if you go down, even if it gets into the water, those hover engines there will let you lift above the water. Now, it doesn't always work right, so you want to try to make those hover engines as even as possible. One thing that I often do is I will separate those into different groups. Let's see, if I put this hover engine in its own group, call it water escape, I want to add you to water escape. I want to add you to that one, and then I want to add you to that one as well. You can choose the specific ones by looking at them and then selecting them. Now what I can do is the main hover engines, you can turn them off, and if you level out, the only hover engines that'll be active are the water escape ones, and you can go up like so. Of course, like I said, if the hover engines aren't balanced, this is what happens. But you can press O and it'll level it out, and then you should, usually what I do is I will key a trigger to it, water escape, and then in signal logic, all the ones in the main hover engines, I will invert water escape so that they're off when water escape is on, like so. And these I will just key to water escape. Now I can turn it on, and then if I turn it off, the main hover engines are on. Of course, let's level out real quick. Okay. Since my positioning of this middle one is not where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to position it a little differently. I'm going to put this here and then here, and then I'm going to put that there, and then I need a single hover engine there, and I can leave that one there because now I've got 4 up here. And let's move you to water escape and key you to water escape. So now if I go down and get underneath the water like so, these hover engines that are still above it, I can just click water escape and raise my vessel up. And then I can click the other way and it'll go even higher. So those are some building techniques with hover vessels that you're going to want to keep in mind when building your hover vessel. Keep in mind the amount of hover engines that you use on each side, as well as in the front and the back. And you really want to keep an eye on your center of center of mass, because you'll notice if I do this and I put a whole lot of extra blocks on one side, that when I get into the vessel, that it severely alters that center of mass. You'll notice it's way off to the left now. And if that center of mass is so off kilter, like for instance using artificial mass cubes, which artificial mass cubes are meant to correct center of gravity, I could put this one artificial mass cube on the right side and you'll notice it's now tilting to the right as opposed to where it was before, that the center of mass is way off to the right because I used the heavy artificial mass cube. But if I put a string of heavy artificial mass cubes to simulate putting way too much stuff on one side compared to the other, that's what happens. Your hover vessel will just fall over. And you don't want that. So don't use too many blocks on one side. You always want it equal. It doesn't have to be completely symmetrical all the time, but a equal amount of mass is preferred. So let's go ahead. You'll also notice that it was top heavy because all those artificial mass blocks were on the top. So let's go ahead and just remove all this and get it back to the way it was. And now it's just gonna be perfectly level. Now, if I really wanted to make this water escape more aesthetic or whatever, you know, I would change positions and the like. But I always prefer angled, you know, bottoms and stuff to, well, clunky regular old blocks. So that's it for the hover vessel portion of this little tutorial. We're going to go on to the small vessel portion, which is very similar to doing hover vessels. With small vessels, it's a lot easier because small vessels don't require you to really worry about the center of mass. You'll notice the thing's still on, but I'm not going to worry about it. So, like with the other one, I like to just place these down. And one of my basic builds, called the mini pod, is basically just this. You put that down. You put a down-facing one here, a back-facing one there, and then a left and a right. Throw the core on it, or throw the cockpit on it, like so, and put an up-facing one right here. Now, with the actual mini pod, I also put a cargo box in the cargo box in the front and in the back, and yeah, it's a little bit different, but that's basically what I did to start with the mini pod. So if you just spawn the mini pod, you'll see that it's just got the rear facing, the basic of everything, and I added headlights to the front. So, just if you just wanted to do that, you'd add 2 headlights here, and then cargo, and put the docking pads on the bottom, and you basically would have a mini pod right there. Oh, I also put an oxygen tank on there. Oxygen tanks aren't absolutely necessary, but they are really useful. Why did this not fill up? Oh, I don't have any fuel on me. Let me just give me some fuel, and then there. Now, there's your basic small vessel. Now, of course, it doesn't look very aesthetic. That's why I went ahead and modified the mini pod to add some things. But to make a small vessel, you just want to use the same type of building design techniques that you use with the hover vessel, but instead of instead of the hover engines, put down-facing thrusters. But you always want at least one up-facing thruster. And for small vessels, it's generally a good idea to have at least an equal number of up and down facing thrusters and left and right facing thrusters, because when you're in space, you don't want your vessel to be like pushing to the left or right a whole lot more than the other, or up or down. Now, up and down isn't as significant, and I often have about twice as many down facing thrusters as up facing thrusters. Because if you're in the atmosphere, you're going to want more down-facing thrusters, or at least more down thrust. So occasionally I'll use medium thrusters facing down and small thrusters facing up, so that when you're in the atmosphere, you've got more down thrust. I'll also end up using the control panel to key different things for atmospheric flight and other stuff like that. But that'd be a more advanced building, or advanced, I don't know, advanced construction technique for capital vessels and small vessels, which I've done quite a bit in my videos, and I could show more if you guys like. But that's the basics for hover vessel and small vessel building. Hover vessels are by far the hardest to build actual working designs, because you have to worry about the center of mass and the hover engine placement. Now, with the center of mass, the optimum point for the center of mass is just behind the center of volume, because the center of mass being right behind it makes it so that it actually levels out perfectly flat. Left and right, as long as it's close, you're probably good. because the only difference in this is the difference between the weight of the generator and the fuel tank. So I'll often mirror fuel tanks and generators like that, and it'll be, you know, a little bit off kilter left and right, but that doesn't affect the movement of the hover vessel. Whereas if you put like hover engines on the left and not on the right, your hover vessel would be falling off to the right. So anyway, that's it for this little tutorial. I hope everybody enjoyed watching the tutorial. If you did, hit that like button for me. If you want to see more, or if you want me to elaborate on any specific topic mentioned in the video, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you want to see, and go ahead and subscribe. I'm KnowItAllDM, and as always, y'all have a good day now.